So now let's go to the panel, and to continue the discussion, we will do in the same way as we did before. So what I will ask you to every panelist to go 3 minutes, and only 3 minutes, on one thing they like in the report and one thing they don't like, and don't hesitate to follow the path of Mark and be provocative. I think that's how we progress. We progress intellectually. So I think it's very, very important. And then at the very end, I will ask you, everyone, one advice for Denis, who is now in charge of the DMA, not review, but the DMA evaluation, one advice for him. So let's start with you, Kush from Mozilla, who I must say, and I must praise Mozilla, because we were discussing the previous panel that there is not much data around and so on, but I must say Mozilla is one of the rare company who really give a lot of data on the different experiments you have done. So I think that needs to be mentioned, because you are one of the main source of independent data now.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I mean, being an independent, non-profit, and open source company really helps us to publish our data and have it out there. So, yeah, appreciate it. And thanks for the papers as well. I'm going to focus my comments on the enforcement and governance paper, although I'd love to talk about breaking up the commission another time. And look, it was a really good paper. I think it's one of the best ones out of CERRE that I've seen. And it sets out the range of considerations pretty well. It recognizes the importance of interoperability, not just for competition, but for resilience and sovereignty as well. We totally agree with that. Won't be a surprise. It also talks about the grey elements of the DMA, right? The fact that despite the DMA being accused of being micromanaging of product choices, actually it's incredibly high level as a regulation, and it leaves a lot of grey area. And of course, gatekeepers are reluctant to comply. In some cases, they're even calling for it to be repealed. So inevitably, they take that interpretation in their favor. Specifically on interoperability, though, what it does is call out the fact that you need more than just APIs to interoperate. Now, if I can bring that to life from a company perspective, from a product perspective, our engineers and product managers of Firefox, they're not sitting around waiting for an API from Apple or Microsoft or Google to enable them to do what they need to do. They're going to continue, they have product roadmaps, right? They're going to continue to be building the product and innovating. They would love to have these APIs, but they're not going to wait for them. And what's needed, in our side is we have to invest significant resources to then interoperate. And so what we need is more than just an API. What we need is documentation, service levels, notices of changes, all of these things, which the report really brought out, and I thought that was excellent. It also called out the importance of having inclusive and collective governance, and that means also civil society and technologists as well. We heard from Mark in the previous panel that often they're excluded from this, from these kind of discussions, and it's really important to have them here, be debating these issues. And researchers, academics, and civil society are a big part of that. They can bring some of the data that we were just talking about. I'll quickly skip, because I know you're going to tell me off otherwise, to things that I think could be improved. One was on privacy and security, right? Like, this is a big part of conversations around access, around interoperability, around choice. We always come back to privacy and security and what that means. And obviously, the report laid out the fact that, sometimes there can be legitimate privacy and security considerations when you're looking at interoperability. And then a proportionate approach is needed, but that shouldn't frustrate contestability. I don't disagree with that. But what I think is that it should go further. What we at Mozilla think is that it should go further, because it ignores the fact that privacy and security actually can be parameters of competition. Not always. It's not always a race to the bottom, right? It can be a race to the top. And for us, that's the case. We're a non-profit. We have privacy and security at the heart of everything that we do. And, we compete with Apple in the space, for example. I'm sure Gary would agree on security. There are only 3 browser engine developers left in the world. There's Apple, Google, and Mozilla. And we're all trying to push the web forward, both in terms of capability, but also in terms of security. And in some cases, Apple will innovate and others will follow. In other cases, Mozilla has innovated and Apple has followed and said, credit Mozilla for doing this innovation. So that's how it works. That's when you have competition. Unfortunately, that's not, we don't really have competition to the extent we would like in that case, but it shows that actually you can have more than just privacy and security as a shield for competition, or as a downside to competition. Actually, what we think is that you can improve privacy and security with competition as well, and I'd love to see more of that conversation as part of the DMA.
Super, thank you very much, guys. Now let's go to Ruxandra from the Coalition of Open Digital Ecosystem, if you can just explain exactly what it is, and then your main point.
With pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on this panel, Alexandre. It is a pleasure to join this discussion today on behalf of CODE, the Coalition for Open Digital Ecosystems. So indeed, for those of you who don't know us, CODE brings together a dozen leading tech companies, very diverse, some large, some smaller, diverse geographies too, but united by the conviction that open digital ecosystems are better. They are better for innovation, they are better for growth, they're better for consumers who get to choose. And so, again, thank you very much also, Zach, for this great paper. I think there's a lot in it that we also agree on. What we've seen at CODE is indeed since the DMA was adopted, there's been some progress achieved towards openness and interoperability. But there's also a lot more that needs to be done. And so we share the assessment in the report that the priority should be now on enforcement and on delivering the real-life impact for businesses as well as for consumers. And so the report offers several recommendations for how to get there. And one I would like to pick that we particularly like at CODE is to highlight the important point on security and privacy, so building on Kush's point as well, that blanket security concerns should not be used as a smokescreen to undermine DMA implementation and limit progress towards contestability. I think security and privacy are of utmost importance for businesses and consumers alike, absolutely. But it is also not true, we believe, that walled gardens are necessary to preserve security. We feel that any exception to openness and interoperability must be specific, proportionate, and evidence-based, and that true security really relies on the robustness of the mechanisms, not on keeping the inner workings hidden from the industry. So to Kush's point, this can be a race to the top, I think. One point where perhaps we would disagree slightly with the report is on the pace of installing these new governance mechanisms. We really feel like a wait-and-see sort of approach to governance is a luxury that European industry really cannot afford at this point. I think what we would say is if you wait to manage these functions, you've already sort of lost the race to implement the DMA's objectives. And small businesses don't have the time, the knowledge or the capacity actually to navigate complex regulations or indeed go through the complex steps of requesting interoperability with operating systems functionalities. Next month, we will in fact publish business polling to see how businesses perceive of the DMA and what the DMA offers to them. And that polling indicates that 57% of companies polled are already facing increased costs due to compatibility barriers. 65% are simply not aware that the DMA offers processes to request interoperability. And 69% believe that the processes put in place by gatekeepers are not sufficiently transparent or efficient. And so again, come back to the main point, I think, for us, is that for businesses to really feel the real-life impact and benefits of the DMA, openness should be a day one architectural requirement.
Thank you very much. So apparently there is not only the law that we should simplify, but probably also some processes that the gatekeeper imposed. Alexandre from the CCIA.
Yes, thank you, Alexandre. And thank you for the invitation. So CCIA, just a disclaimer, we represent both the designated gatekeepers and business users. So we are coming from both point of view. And I think, to be honest, what is also true what is true for the DMA is also true for a number of recent regulations. What we are focusing on in terms when we're reaching the stage of implementation and enforcement is workable, predictable framework, which a framework that allows companies to know where they're going when they're building their compliance programs and avoid unintended consequences for the broader ecosystem, including the end users. What we liked about the papers was the focus on Greater cooperation between enforcement authorities, especially when there's some degree of interaction. And I think I would point here to a not so recent case from the Court of Justice, the Scotland case, where clearly the Court of Justice, to me, I read this decision as like, it says a number of different things, but it says, hey, we have a principle of sincere cooperation. It's written, it's one line in the treaty. And, well, in the absence of laws, meaning, i.e., there should be probably laws, there should be more specifications on how regulators talk to one another when there's frictions between multiple legislation, and including the DMA. So I very much like that recommendations toward greater protocol sort of cooperation between authorities. And further than that, we liked the recommendation towards greater independence of the enforcement framework. The Commission, as you pointed out, Alexandre, acts as both the judge, the jury, the executioner. It's also obviously part of the executive branch, and all of that makes it highly susceptible to politicization of any enforcement, including the DMA, not only, whether the pressure comes from outside or also within. It's also, independence, I think, allows, in the day-to-day enforcement of DMA, would allow for a more frictionless, maybe longer, but frictionless, more highly technical assessments whenever there are, whenever there's different trade-offs that need to be weighed in. And maybe just one teeny tiny point, I don't know how much time I have left, but on the things that could maybe subject to a follow-up paper would be more granularity on ways to measure proportionalities and trade-off. On purely DMA matters, I think we would want to see more procedural guardrails, such as, for example, whenever there are we need more highly technical assessments or there's disagreements between parties, having a stop-the-clock mechanism, hitting the pause button for having sort of that appeased sort of decision-making process and that assessment that precedes the decision-making process. And obviously when DMA intersect, but that I'm repeating myself, but when the DMA intersect with other laws and rights, we would want to see maybe the high-level group is a starting point, but it shouldn't be a high-level group. It should be far more hands-on and being able to sort of to be activated on a case-by-case basis. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. So calling for the evolution of the high-level group, which is clearly something we will be keen to watch. Let's go now to Max from the Open Market Institute.
Great, well, thanks for having me. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Open Markets Institute, we're a think tank that focuses on both studying and addressing the risks that market concentration poses both to our economies, but also to our societies, democracies at large. And we see the DMA as a key tool in that. And also, you know, to continue in the sort of vein of transparency, we do not represent or we are not funded by any business interest, whether on the business user side or the gatekeeper side. So I'm going to focus, like Kush, on Zach's report, which for some reason sort of provoked more reflections. I thought it was a great report overall, and I think one of the point that I thought was really, really important is that, you know, access obligations in themselves, whether through the DMA or other laws, are not in themselves enough, and actually the question of how you monitor, how you govern that access, I think, is more important in the long run. So I think despite this idea, you know, some had initially about the DMA being this magical self-executing law where you just write a bunch of rules on paper and then suddenly everything changes. I think it's very obvious that that isn't the case based on how we've seen enforcement go so far. And there's just a lot of work to be done, you know, by the Commission, but by everyone with a stake in the DMA to make sure that these rules actually produce an effect. I would also sort of echo Kush's point. I really liked how the report mentioned the link between openness and resilience, and specifically how open digital ecosystems promote resilience by reducing the dependence of users or of businesses on any particular platform. I think that's a really important point, and I think particularly in this environment now where we have the US government making threats against European tech regulation. We've seen massive cloud outages, for example, that have had societal effects. So I think the DMA, we shouldn't think of it just in the context of consumers or competitors, but really when it comes to things like resilience, security, sovereignty. In terms of sort of things, there was nothing I completely disagree with, but I think this idea of inclusive governance, I think, is really interesting, and I think there is a need to move beyond, what was described as this more gatekeeper-led approach to an approach that brings in certainly business users more expansively, but also consumer groups, civil society, academia. I think that could definitely be helpful, but I think we also need to avoid sort of enforcement being outsourced to groups like that, because I think if you don't have the Commission kind of driving things forward with a vision of what good looks like, then I think you end up potentially with a sort of mishmash of different interests and perspectives that's not really coherent and doesn't really achieve anything. So I think that's a key point. So I want to see the Commission in the lead, including through things like specification decisions, which I'm pleased we've seen more of lately. I think the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to sort of third-party, kind of independent initiatives in governance is that there is a high risk of these types of things being captured by a sort of small number of actors. And so we've seen, for example, to take one example, W3C, which sets a lot of standards around the internet. There's been a lot of controversy around, the role of, for example, Google in playing a disproportionate role in setting rules on browsers, for example, through their dominance in Chrome. So I think in terms of any initiatives that are set up to supervise the DMA, we need to make sure that it isn't just the gatekeepers that are driving that, but a whole set of actors. And one last very quick point, I think, not just in this report, but I think throughout the reports, innovation is referred to a lot, but I think without necessarily being defined, and I think it's important that we do so. I think both because innovation is one goal of the DMA and of regulation in general, but we have to weigh it against other things, and that includes things like resilience, for example, or European sovereignty right now. But I think also within innovation, we have to distinguish between there is innovation that I think potentially consolidates power more, or that promotes, for example, screen addiction or data harvesting. And then there are other forms of innovation that do the opposite and that are more decentralized and that help us achieve, better health or make us more knowledgeable. So I think we need to first define innovation before we talk about the trade-offs of innovation versus anything else.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a very important point, and that's clearly a point where we want to work a little bit more at CERRE is, innovation is a catchword for a lot of things, and as you say, I mean, we have to see what kind of process of innovation, centralized versus decentralized, and what kind of innovation. So you are perfectly right, and I think this is something we should work more. Zach, I will give you the brief reaction word after having heard everyone. Gary from Apple.
First of all, congratulations on cutting our contributions in half. I think we were supposed to go 6 minutes, so I'll cut down to 3 as quickly as I can. I also welcome the CERRE work in this space. It's actually very important work. CERRE kind of stands in the middle a little bit, as I see it. You take contributions from gatekeepers, you take contributions from civil society, other players, and you distill down what appear to me to be often diametrically opposing views and try and chart a consensus. And I think it's extremely important that we have bodies such as CERRE which are making a genuine attempt to do that, because I think otherwise we find ourselves often talking past each other in these forums. I'm never going to agree with code. Code has, it's an industry mouthpiece. It has views that it has to give. So I'm not going to agree. So having us on a panel, it's great. We'll have different views, but it's not going to reach consensus. That's where I think CERRE comes in, because you can find a path between code and ourselves.
It's not easy. Huh?
No, but you can do it. And I think that's important. And in fact, when I see the term of inclusive governance as a model, it's kind of appealing to me. But then it's appealing to me in the way that Max just said, actually, that it's only appealing if, in fact, the people participating in that are not captured. captured by outside interests. And actually, I didn't think I would agree with many of the points that Max would make before I came here, but it turned out I did, in fact, actually, because as a gatekeeper and the person who's responsible for a large part of our engagements with the European Commission on these issues, we ourselves have found, obviously, in a very real way, that the DMA is not self-executing. It does require detailed engagements. It does require over 200 meetings with my colleagues, sometimes friends in the European Commission, over the last number of years, and that's going to continue. I will leave here to go to another meeting with the Commission. Denis will leave to go to a meeting. We're all engaged in meetings. I think what's important is that the views of genuine business users, gatekeepers, Commission, and bodies such as CERRE have an opportunity to engage. I agree with that, but we need to make sure that the process is not captured in the way that perhaps I would feel it has been by some people who represent themselves as representing broader swathes of business users, when in fact they have very specific interests which are to actually benefit their funders, and I think that's something which we should all be conscious of. I was also struck in the paper in terms of inclusive governance, and this is something which I spoke on publicly a few weeks ago, and you were there as well, Alexandre, was the coordination piece. Now, with the coordination piece, I learned something new this morning at 8:30 a.m. as I was reading through paper 4, which is that there are 270 different digital agencies in the...
You didn't meet all of them yet.
No, I know. I hope I don't have to.
You complain about meetings, but you're not...
So between member states and the EU, that is mind-boggling, in fact, that all of these have an interest. And as a gatekeeper, I could, in fact, have to encounter any or all of them, as you say, on an ongoing basis. And they then have to try and coordinate. One, they should be making sure that I'm not trying to play them off against each other. But secondly, they should be coordinating so that they act in a consistent way. And I think we have a lot of work to do there. Now, you've also heard me, and that's what I also support in the paper, is that we do need to make that cooperation real. And I want to pick up on a point that Kush made. We in Apple have never sought to use security and privacy as a blank no to doing things. All we're asking is that actually security and privacy have a place at the table with the relevant authorities involved, and then the right answer be met. Not the one that Apple says, necessarily. I think we have some opinions on it, but I'm not saying our opinions are the final ones. But with the independent agencies responsible for it so that we can arrive at the answer that suits everybody quickly. Does not have to take some time. And then in terms of where I thought there could be some room for improvement in your otherwise excellent work in this space, I do think the area of proportionality is important. And I think there is some reference to it, but I think where we see it most often in our space in relation to what I'm going to term so-called interoperability by design. That is not proportionate. It is not proportionate that every single feature of iOS that Apple ships, there's somehow an expectation on the part of the European Commission, as I understand it, that that has to be interoperable by design, regardless of any market demand or contestability issues associated with it. I cannot believe that that was the original intent, because it implies a massive overhead, which has actually left us in the incredible position that there are some features we have not been able to ship here in the EU because we cannot solve those very security and privacy issues to the satisfaction of ourselves, and then ultimately satisfaction of the European Commission. So, for instance, we've no iPhone mirroring, because we can't come up with a way to make your iPhone interact with non-Apple devices in a way that you're not handing over control of it in a safe manner. I'd love for us to be able to do it, but we cannot see a path as things are currently set up.
Thank you very much, Gary, for this call for cooperation and proportionality. So now let's go to you. Denis, many thanks for coming. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. You are there since the beginning, you know. And so, yes, I mean, on what you have read, on what you have heard, what are your reactions?
Okay, so first of all, many thanks for the invitation. Always a pleasure, and always a pleasure to be in a panel with Gary and then run to another meeting with Gary. And this is actually meant in a very positive sense. I will not comment on the positives and negatives of the reports as such. I think what I want to, focus on is some things which I think in reports are presented in a way where I feel we agree, but maybe they are presented in a way where I would say we are actually already doing it. So for example, what I find very interesting in the governance mechanism report is this, three-layer structure, gatekeeper-led, commission-led, and then of course all-inclusive approach. To be very honest, and I hope Gary can in a way agree with me, even though probably not on everything, but in a way, these things at the moment seem to be presented as, very distinct, not like one, being very much interconnected and complementary. The way I see my life in the Commission and what we are currently doing is actually these three are already in a way, complemented and done on a daily basis. It's true, DMA is built on the principle that, the one that knows its business model best will have to come up with the compliance solution for the obligation which is there, but then, where there may be questions and issues, and again, maybe Gary will not always agree with me, we have formal ways to provide guidance, because I agree, maybe, the way people have expected that everything will be self-executing and, implemented from minute one is not actually the case. So we may have specification proceedings. I mean, one thing I always say on panels our job in the context of the DMA as ex-ante tool is, the shift in paradigm. We are not there to find non-compliance. We are there to find compliance. And yes, I know Gary doesn't like compliance by design notion, but that's essentially what this is all about. But then, when it comes to the all-inclusive approach, I'm not saying there is no room for improvement of, inclusion of third parties, civil society, academics. But we have many occasions where this is already the case, right? We have, public workshops, and I take the point from the report that these may not always be best for exactly all the discussions which are being held or would need to be held, but that's why we also have what I would call semi-public discussions. You also have trilateral meetings. So there is a lot of inclusion of interested third parties and also academics, right? We also organize public workshops where issues were presented from the perspective of academics. Again, I think, the good, positive input of the paper is, it provides a lot of meat for thought, where things can be improved, right? Security and privacy. It's always coming up, and I think it's an extremely important point. It's a consideration which is central to European digital rulebook. So I think that's the starting point that we should all have, right? And then not think that much about, whether it's used as a barrier or, whether, it can be used as a, factor of competition, but something that we all need to consider in the discussions. And, people often say, well, DMA doesn't take that into consideration. That's not true. There are many provisions in the DMA which very clearly say, where necessary, where justified, security is an important consideration that has to be taken into account. And again, I like the intervention of Kush. It's an important parameter of competition. So it's not only about, gatekeepers potentially having malintentions, and, I'm not pointing to anyone, to use this as an argument, okay, there is non-effective compliance, but it's also something where everybody can come with better security measures, better privacy measures, and I, as a user, will be the first one to go for a solution of that type. On the second paper, as you said, I think, we are many lawyers in the room. I think we can all agree on the regulatory consistency, right? I think there are two aspects, right? There are many rules and there are many authorities. I think the DMA provides the framework where, we have very clear rules when it comes to interplay with the rules. We don't have the obligation, as you had for the communication on the DSA, where colleagues actually looked into, I think, 54 different acts that interplay with the DSA. It's more about how the DMA interplays with other acts that may pursue other public interests and how we should cooperate with other authorities. I have to say that there, both in terms of actual cases, actual investigation, there is this cooperation. Of course, something which is not very public because it's part of the proceedings. But then also, as you know, we already have a high-level group, and one of the main roles of that high-level group is to ensure regulatory consistency. So the discussions which are being held are there to ensure that regulatory consistency. And what is also, I mean, we are trying to see how to improve the process of the high-level group. So when the point was made, this is too high level. Well, we already have working groups of the high-level group so that we can already discuss more operational issues. But of course, I mean, as with anything in life, there is room for improvement. So again, I think the report provides, and this discussion today provides quite a lot of interesting thought how things can at least be thought through to be improved, right?
Thank you. Thank you very much. You want to react very briefly?
Sure. It doesn't sound like anyone hated the paper, which is always a good start. Not guaranteed. So I don't have any burning points to respond to, but maybe just on the point that Max raised about whether inclusive governance is really about kind of delegating enforcement. And I think that actually inclusive governance can only work if the Commission is heavily involved. And that includes having the threat and the pressure of intervening if inclusive governance doesn't deliver the right outcomes. And we know this from the way that self-regulation and co-regulatory systems work generally. You know, we talk about negotiating in the shadow of regulation. And it is that pressure, including the unpredictability of not knowing what the Commission might decide in the end, that is going to give stakeholders, you know, all around the table, no matter what their position is, the pressure to bring their best offer to the table and to build consensus. So yes, that will mean that some stakeholders are captured, but it doesn't negate the benefits of the process. What I think it does ask us to think a lot about is the structure of how these inclusive governance forums are going to work so that the process and the outcome is fair. And I think on outcome, I think we can point to some things that would be measures of success here, which is we would want the criteria for access seekers who want access to data or to functionality, we would want those criteria to be transparently laid out. We want them to be objective, not subjective ones where the gatekeeper gets to decide how it feels about whether a third party is a security threat or not. If there is discretion, because, you know, we do know that there are bad actors out there who are trying to exploit these types of rights, then we want there to be recourse to an independent third-party technical expert who can decide whether or not something's a security threat or not. And we would expect to see stability in the access criteria. And like, none of this is new, right? Like, those of us who have worked in telecoms, energy, regulated sectors where these issues have come up time and time again, we know what to look for in whether or not a process is going to be workable and give enough certainty to third-party access seekers. And then I think that, you know, we have seen in practice some processes and some formats that work too. So clearly in standardization settings, there's been questions about, you know, the makeup of different types of bodies and whether or not they are fair. But we've seen also, like, Apple and Google have made these commitments together to make switching easier, which I think is a really positive step. As I mentioned in my presentation, there's the Data Transfer Initiative, which is a group of different companies that have worked together to make the format of data and its ability to be transferred across different systems easier. And I think, as Gary mentioned, there is CERRE, which we try to do our best to bring different viewpoints together and to drive consensus. So, you know, we'd be very happy to act as this inclusive governance forum in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we have 7 minutes left, and there is 6 speakers. No, 5 speakers, because I think Denis will. Because what I will ask is, what is your main message for Denis? So in 1 minute, Denis is in charge of his team of the evaluation, his colleague in terms of the evaluation. So one key message for him. I would say just to your criteria, you know, that you mentioned, Zach, of a good process. I would ask I would say also what Ruxandra was saying, you know, simple process. I think that's also an important element that I think come from your study and which I would say is very key. So one message for Denis, each of you.
So 2 very quick messages. One is compliance reporting. We've come a long way from 12-page compliance reports, but there's still a long way to go. Particularly, you know, there's a lot of data, a lot of A/B testing done from companies of all sizes, gatekeepers all the way down to startups, right? Like, no one is seeing that, and the Commission should at least see it and be able to see, you know, how measures are being tested. So please look for that and ask for it. Secondly, AI. You have the tools within the DMA to deal with this already. Let's not wait for the review.
Thank you. I think the important thing is to remember the context of what the DMA is trying to achieve. And so what it's trying to achieve is to support growth and innovation. And so what we're trying to do at Code is to propose how to get there as well. So I think that that's important to start with. For us, the DMA will only deliver, again, if openness is not considered as an add-on or an afterthought, but really it is built in from the very beginning. And so this is what we call for is indeed interoperability by design. So make sure that third parties enjoy an equal level of access to the features used by operating systems on services. And so this may be achieved through adopting industry-wide available standards. It may not, but this could be one of the ways. What we feel is that we don't need more regulation at this point. Really, that the focus needs to be on processes, but on outcomes, on delivering real-life impact for businesses. And again, this means making openness the default features at launch.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this may surprise you, but I think we need more regulations. Denis, if you can maybe pour all your frustrations into the DMA enforcement process, working the back end into maybe a digital enforcement omnibus. That could be a next step for, that's an idea. That's my plea to you. But also, I mean, you can have all the laws that you want if you don't have the resources, and that's a plea actually to member states. It's great to play the aristocrat and have a wonderful regulatory castle, but if you don't have the resources, the money, or the expertise to maintain the castle, it will crumble. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Max?
Alexandre stole my point from me, but yeah, I basically want, hardworking or indeed overworked civil servants like Denis and Antoine before, and everyone enforcing the DMA to get more money to do their job. I mean, I'd happily personally make a donation, but I think really, this is about the Parliament and the member states sort of increasing the resources available for the DMA through the next EU budget, or there are some interesting ideas about having a levy charged to the gatekeepers. I know Gary won't like that idea, similar to the DSA model. I think that could help a lot. And I think that would help with, obviously, a lot of the things that we're talking about today, including the enforcement of the existing obligations, monitoring the impact of the DMA, particularly these specification proceedings, which as has been discussed, are very resource intensive, and so more money would help there. But also, I think it would help the Commission to look beyond the battles of today and really try and emerge prevent areas of sort of emerging consolidation or anti-competitive behavior, for example, which we're seeing in the AI space, where a lot of today's dominant gatekeepers are, bundling AI products with their existing core platform services, and looking into that, requires a lot of time and money. So, yeah, more money for the Commission.
I had a good few things to say to Denis. First of all, I want to confirm that Denis and his colleagues are extremely hardworking. I see. Yes, I see them at all hours of all days working on items. But that then reminds me of the specification decision process, because we seem to be liking it here. But ultimately, the specification decision process is a denial of service attack on the gatekeeper and also on the Commission services, because the 6 months period turns out to be too short. And I think this was a point I made before, because you have 3 months to do the PFs, very tight window. You're talking, you're drafting, talking, exchanging, and then you publish the PFs, and then you go into another period of going back and forth on the PFs and dealing with market feedback. It just doesn't turn out to be long enough. And so if there's something that could be looked at, I think that period should be lengthened in some sensible way that takes account of people's lives. Having done it myself, I think I've said before in a public forum, my average amount of sleep per night over that 3-month period from October to December 24 went down to 5 hours per night. And that doesn't make any sense, actually, from anybody's perspective. So I would say, and I know it was the same on the Commission side. So it's too short of a period, and I think we should try and do it in a more measured manner. And then, look, the high-level group is not working, from my point of view. I've heard the head of the Dutch Competition Authority say it's not working. I've heard the head of the the telco regulators say it's not working. So it's not just me with some kind of perspective on it. It is not providing the input into decision making that I don't know if it was hoped for, but it's definitely not happening, and we need to find another way to do it, whether it's changing the high-level group or finding more formal inputs. I don't think Denis can solve that himself. He'll try, but I think we just need to be realistic. What is the outcome we want? Do we want these people involved or don't we? If we do, that's not the way to achieve it. That's clear. We should all just accept that now.
Thank you. Denis, the last word.
I took the notes, so all good, all good. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.